Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel.
So, bag C. Now, I'm not gonna bore you guys to death watching me do a bunch of shocks. I'll just kind of go through what comes in the bags and talk a little bit about shocks. And I've got other videos where I build shocks. They're all pretty much the same, depending on whether you want to go with bladder or emulsion. Personally, I prefer emulsion building. I like being able to bleed the brakes myself. Now, I may make some mods to these shocks as far as which shock shafts I run and such, but that's just a matter of personal taste. I'll certainly tell you what I'm doing and try to give you at least some explanation. One of the reasons I was happy to buy this kit is that I've had several low-C kits in recent history, and I've got a lot of shocks and shock parts, so it kind of made sense to stick with them. It's really nice that they give us these Delrin parts. They are much more precise than pieces that come off a tree. I'm talking about these white pieces. These are our spacers and our the base of the shock that goes underneath the cap, the black cap here, and they've given us, of course, a pair of tools which are really handy. These are about the best shock tools that you're going to get in a kit. And, you know, having a full aluminum shock body is very important, instead of just having like some tube with some threading on it. These are a properly machined and molded part. You've got this whole inner chamber here where you have a stack of spacers, a seal, a spacer, another seal, and then another spacer. So you've got a lot of structure to prevent your shock shafts from deviating. If you've ever had a shock that's at its max, you know, up, and it kind of just sits there and sticks, and you've got to kind of push on the car to get it to bump into motion, that's because you're getting a bit of lean, and it's because there's not enough structure down here to keep the shock shaft pointed straight, and the piston gets wedged against the side of the shock body, and that's just cheap shocks, in my opinion. You know, a good shock like these, it goes into motion right away from the base. It travels all the way up with a minimum amount of stiction. And they even, you know, print the size of the shock body on the side. This is we know these are 42 millimeters. These are our rears. Our fronts are 36.5s. And they make other shock bodies in other sizes for other applications, other kits. And many of the parts can be interchanged and used together. Another very nice thing that we get is aluminum preload adjusters instead of plastic. And here are our shock seals, and they give us high-end shock seals. These are X seals. In other words, instead of being a round O-ring, it's molded like, instead of being a round piece of rubber that is like a donut, it's an X. So the inside has two flanged edges that rub against the shock shaft instead of the entire rounded surface that inevitably gets flattened out of a normal O-ring. That means there's less surface contact, but it's like having a pair of windshield wipers that go up and down, and it's better at preventing seepage. And not only is it better at preventing seepage, but there's less stiction, there's less resistance. So I'm going to take a minute and go through some of my other shock hardware and decide what I'm going to do with this. I'm also going to be checking the build sheet. These shocks come with 35 millimeter shock shafts, and some people run the, 3.5 millimeter shock shafts, and some people run the 3 millimeter shock shafts that are nitrile coated, just to have a little bit of a smoother action. And I have some of those, and I may indeed run those, I may not. I need to figure out exactly where they are. They may be in use in another shock absorber at the moment, so we will see what I decide to do as far as that goes. But I'll let you know what I go with. I just pulled out some spare parts and such, figuring out which directions I'm going to go. Largely, I am following the shock build on the build sheet. For example, they provide us 32 and 27.5 weight shock oils. He's running 30 in the front and 27.5 in the rear. Excuse me, reverse that. 27.5 in the front and 30 in the rear. And like most people, he's running the thin pistons, the concave pistons or convex pistons. They are machined, and I've got several different sets. I've got the 1.5. I've actually got two of the 1.5, two pairs. The 1.6, the 1.617, which is one hole of each size, and then the 1.7s. Now he's running 2.17 in the rear and 2.15 in the front. So I've got the pistons he's using, and I've got some stuff to tune with. I've got one of the pairs of shock shafts in trinitrile, but they hook up using the clips. I'm going to go ahead and try building one up with this. He's also running, excuse me, the 3.0 shafts instead of the 3.5s, which I don't have. And I was looking around online and couldn't really find what I was looking for in that vein. I'm just going to stay with the 3.5s. I don't think it's a huge issue. So I'll go with that. Other than that, everything is going to go, to the way he's building. He's running the high spring cup in the front and the mid spring cup in the rear. I have the low, medium, and high cups, so I won't have any trouble matching that part of the setup. He's running the low frequency whites, which is what come with the kit for the rear, and I've actually got 3 other pairs of these. It comes with a green spring. He is running a associated gray spring, and it's a very specific one. It's hard to find. It's out of stock everywhere right now. I put myself on the mailing list for a couple places to get that when it comes in. It's $4.99 for a pair. But I looked it up to get the spring weight, and it's a 4.45 spring weight shock, and these low frequency blues are the closest thing I have to that. They are 4.53 or 4.58. In any event, they're as close as I've got to that spring rate. So I'm going to go ahead and use these for the time being. That should match up fairly well in place of those grays. And so that's my shock build right there. Maybe I'll do a snapshot, or what I'll probably do is put a link to this build out there. Since it's already out there, I'll just link to it, and you guys can download it at will if you wish. And so I assume you guys know how to build shocks. I'm not gonna demonstrate. He's also running the standard eyelet. There's the standard and the +2mm eyelet, and we got some of those +2s in our kit. These should be it right here. If you compare them one against the other. Yep. Now some people run like the taller ones, the +2s in the rear on their shocks. They think it gets a little more kick out of the car going off jumps. Okay, sorry, my camera ran out of memory card. As I was saying, some people run the +2mm eyelet in the rear. He is not doing that with what he's got set up, so I'm just going to continue following his build as exactly as I can. And so they've given us, of course, some pistons, and these look like they're machined. They are they've given us a pair of 1.6s and a pair of 1.7s, but these are the flat pistons. These are the thin ones. They taper toward the edge like a dish. So these are going to get put away for later, and so I'm going to lay down a towel and put everything out and start building. Again, I'm not going to bore you watching me, build up all these shocks. It's just a lot of work and tedious and not very entertaining at all. It doesn't teach you anything unless I may do a shock video if you guys want, and then I'll try to cover all the different kinds of shocks. Okay, here's a little shock tip. Been doing this for decades. You take a Sharpie, and just like I did with those little end pieces, you just go over the number gently, and that makes it much easier to read your shock piston size. And I just do this for all of my pistons and then toss them in a container. And that way, anytime I need to make a change up, it's easy to figure out which ones are which. So, shocks are going along, and I was reading over the build in greater detail, and it has a it calls for the +2 that comes with the kit front shock tower, but it calls for the standard shock tower for the rear, which does not come with the kit. Now, I had ordered a while ahead of time both of the front and rear standard shock towers, because I had seen that some of the builds had them. Now, I went ahead and removed the front one and sealed it basically I'm just using thin CA, put on a pair of rubber gloves, and just dribble it along the edge and let it run, you know, its way around the edge, and let it seal up the carbon fiber so the carbon fiber doesn't split. Now this is our rear standard, and these are the two fronts, which are very similar, but as you can see there's a slight difference, and that's all there, you know, all there really is between those two is, you know, that 2 millimeter difference there. So I'm going to put the +2 back on now that it's sealed, and this will get set aside for future use, and I'm going to swap the rear one with the standard size. Now I'm not going to do that on camera because it's just redundant. You've seen how this all goes together during the build. I'm just taking off something I put on. I'll show you what it looks like when it's on, and compare the two pieces against each other when they're both off, and we'll go from there. So now I got to put the standard one back on, so I'm just gonna pause up and just work through that. Okay, I went ahead and took apart the back piece. I did not necessarily need to remove this from the transmission. It just seemed easier at the time to just have this as something I could hold in my hand. But if I was in the field, I would not have done that. I would have just taken these 6 screws right here out. You don't even need to remove this wing mount. You can leave it attached. Just take out those 6 screws and disconnect your shock absorbers, and you can swap out the shock tower. Now, I wanted to show you the difference, and it's very much the same as the front one. Just the left to right is about the same. It's just about 2 millimeters taller. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead and put the standard one on. And then since this one is going to be on the loose, I'm going to go ahead and seal this one up. That way all 4 of these are sealed, and I don't have to worry about the carbon fiber splitting over time. Or certainly much less likely to split over time. So it could still happen. And every time I work on this part, I am tempted to swap these 4 screws, whether it's the front or the rear, for aluminum instead of titanium, because it's even lighter, and it's not an area where there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of force on it, but the force is kind of it's more of a linear force that would have to shear the bolts, and I just don't think that's possible. I just don't think there's enough force ever. I think you could drop this thing off a building and not shear these 4 screws. These 2 are just, you know, they're there for holding the wing, really. They add a little bit of structural strength, but it's mainly these 4. But since 90% of the force at least is coming in this direction through the shock absorbers, it's not going this way, so it's not like trying to snap these bolts out. It's trying to torque all 4 of them, and as you can see, the plastic piece itself that this sits in provides a tremendous amount of structural strength. So all those bolts really have to do is hold this in place and keep it from moving anywhere, and the composite piece that they attach to does the rest. I really think that I could swap them out. I don't think it's not a huge deal. I don't know. I mean, the titanium weighs almost nothing. I'm going to go ahead and just stick with the titanium for now. It just nags at me because, you know, there's always that quest to make things as light as possible, and there really isn't any reason the aluminum hardware wouldn't be just as strong in that location. Well, I mean, it's not as strong, but it is not weak enough that it is going to be overwhelmed by the forces that are going to be imparted to this. I guess is the best way to describe it. Anyway. Okay, this may not be necessary for your car, or you might even need to go in the opposite direction that I went. Okay, two-wheel buggies, 10th scale, are very finicky little vehicles. They have to be very precise. When the link that goes from the servo to the steering rack, okay, you want to make sure that the rack is centered and that servo arm is as straight up and down as possible. I've taken this apart and put it back together several times. Now, I don't mean like the whole top part. You can disconnect the servo, kind of kick it sideways, pull it out, disconnect the linkage, and then make changes to the linkage and then put it back together. It's a little hard, but you can do it without taking everything apart. In fact, I was able to do it just by removing the two screws on the bottom of the servo mount. In any event, I took out the standard spacing, which is 2 millimeters, and I put in a 1.5, and that still wasn't quite enough. The servo arm still had a bit of a lean to it, and so I put in a 1 millimeter and tightened it as far down as I could, and that has the servo arm right at just about at perpendicular, and has the steering rack right about dead center. So it's, I mean, it's hard to be 100% exact, but as long as you're really close, you might be able to see down here. You want that straight up and down, because you don't want to be correcting for stuff with sub trim on a car like this. You know, on a bigger car, it's not as big a deal, but you need that rack dead center, and you want the servo straight up and down, because you want to have an equal amount of throw left and right, so that you have the same amount of steering to left and right. If you don't have those two things aligned to each other properly, you're going to have more steering to one side versus the other, and that always feels strange. So, you know, once this is all finished, and I've got, you know, I'll put on the test wheels, and I'll put it on the board, and I'll square everything up, or I'll hook it up to the hoodie. Either way, I will make sure that this linkage is straight up and down, the rack is centered, and then any adjustments to toe or to steering I'm going to do at the turnbuckles. Okay? You don't want to be correcting for things with like sub trim or something like that. And ideally you don't want to have to do any trimming. If you like go out and you run the car and it's steering a little to the left, trim it so that it's run straight, bring it in, look at the difference, and then dial that difference back out with the turnbuckles, and then run it again. And the idea would be to true the car mechanically, not programmatically. In other words, not to have to put any trim input into the servo, to, you know, adjust the turnbuckles a little bit at a time until you get the car to run straight, without adding positive or negative trim. That is also going to give you, you know, equal left and right steering. And on little cars like this, it's very important that you've got things truly centered and dialed. So definitely go through the process I went through. It takes, I don't know, I probably spent 30-40 minutes doing it, you know, because I went, like I said, I went through several iterations. I wanted to be sure that I had it if I'd had to, I was gonna, at this point, take it out, trim the grub screw a little bit, because I was getting toward the end of the grub screw, and go with a 0.5 millimeter spacer and see what that gave me. But it looks like I'm there. If I'm not straight up and down, I'm off by a fraction of a degree. So I think I can work with that. If I have any weirdness, that's going to be one of the first places I go, is tweaking that that connector right there and shortening it a little bit more. So, and we're really dealing in, you know, fractions of a millimeter, a half a millimeter more or less can make a big difference. You'd be surprised, because anything that's not right here seems to amplify itself into the steering. So I went ahead and I taped down my sensor cable. I just used some clear box tape, trimmed a strip of it, and anchored this down, so that's in place. I'm gonna run the motor fan wire along the side here. There's a little place here, a gap that has a little bit of plastic in it. I went ahead and I trimmed that just a bit so the wires can be tucked down in there, and that way I'll be able to well, I need to loosen this to do it, but I need to loosen this and tuck the wires back in. I'll do that as soon as I have the receiver in place. And because I'm going to run the wire around this side, I'm going to put the receiver over here and my ESC on this side. You know, you can see that they've gone through a lot of effort to try to make this car be properly balanced. The motor really sits right in the middle of the car. It's slightly offset, but that's going to be offset by the weight of, you know, the clutch and gears over here on this side and such. It's just very nicely built, and I can't wait to run this for the first time and see how this build turns out. I've got my standard shock tower on here now. I went ahead and that's been sealed. I went ahead and sealed this one up, so this is ready to throw into my parts box. I have the Stiffzel side rails. As you can see, it says SZL, and these say SFT, the ones that are on the car, for soft. And I also, the standard ones came in. I went ahead and tapped out the holes for threads, and I used a silver Sharpie to write STD for standard, because this did not have any markings on it to tell you which it is. It's pretty obvious that it's the standard one, since one says soft and the other has Stiffzel on it, but I thought I'd just go ahead and put that on there just to make it that much easier to identify. So you know, I'm just getting all the different parts ready and filling up the parts box with the various things I'm going to want to bring, things of that nature, and doing, you know, just little housekeeping things on the car, like getting that linkage adjusted. So now I can take that bushing and put that somewhere, and I can save these. I need to go ahead and take a marker to those so I can tell what size they are more easily. So the process is coming along. It's I'm kind of into this stage in the build where it's like little housekeeping chores, and soon I'll be at a point where I'm going to be putting the electronics down on the board, and then it's going to be time to do soldering, and I have soldering to do on my other vehicle as well. So I'm going to do that all at one time, because I don't want to have to break out the soldering station and put it back again twice. It's just easier to do all the soldering I need for both vehicles at one time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.